Hi, I'm Pete Miller, President and CEO of the Institutes. We're a global not-for-profit whose mission is to educate, elevate, and connect the people focused on risk management and insurance. You're listening to Predict and Prevent, a podcast that explores how technology and resiliency can prevent losses before they occur. In each episode, we learn about innovative solutions and hear from leading experts on how they are making these approaches a reality today. Welcome to Predict and Prevent. I'm your host, Pete Miller, and today our guest is Itamar Zabari, co-founder, CEO, and CTO of AstroTeq. Itamar brings a rare combination of deep software engineering expertise, honed in the Israeli Defense Force and the space industry, and a willingness to pursue what most scientists have long considered impossible. AstroTeq is using data on cosmic radiation from deep space, combined with satellite imagery and AI-driven machine learning, to forecast earthquakes up to 25 days before they strike. To put that in perspective, some governments have spent hundreds of millions of dollars building a system that delivers just 12 seconds of warning. In this episode, Itamar breaks down the science behind this extraordinary capability, explains what governments, utilities, and industries can actually do with days rather than seconds of advance notice. Itamar says that earthquakes can be predicted because the Earth actually does warn us, but it's just whispering, and you need to learn how to listen. This is a conversation you won't want to miss. Itamar, you're the CEO and CTO of a company that uses cosmic rays from deep space to predict earthquakes, which honestly sounds like science fiction. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up leading such a very interesting and somewhat unconventional venture.
I come from a technological background. Ever since I was very young, I liked tough problems to solve. I served in the Israeli Defense Force in their software division, and we wrote very, very complex softwares. And then later on in life, I kind of moved from technology into business. So for me, it was always more about how can technology impact the day-to-day. It was always about that. It was never technology standing by itself. And that's kind of the rule that guided me throughout life. Like even in the Israeli army, I led a couple of revolutions in the way that they're designing software. So for me, it was always about that. And in the past 10 years, I was working in the space industry, I participated in a venture that launched 3 nanosatellites to space. I was in charge of writing the whole software for both the satellite, ground devices, apps, and pretty much everything in between. And we proved that nanosatellites can be used for voice over IP. Like I had an app that we called it Chatellite, and we ran voice calls and we sent messages through that. And then while I was working on that, my wife did her Ph.D. and she came to me. She said, listen, we found something potentially good. I'm like, all right, what is it? She's like, potentially we can forecast earthquakes up to 14 days in advance using cosmic radiation. I'm like, wait, what? It's like, it's crazy, right? It's like, and then, she showed me that, and the result is like, it was general publication, like general research. It was global. It wasn't like localized or anything, but bottom line was potentially that can happen. And it seems to be with very high certainty was sigma 5. So it was like, okay, Higgs boson was sigma 5 or 4, if I'm not mistaken. That's real, then maybe that's real. So it's worth my time, right? Because it sounds revolutionary. And I kind of started diving into the data, into the patterns, and I saw some patterns there. I was like, I think it's true. And then I told her we should set up a company and start pursuing it, because we tried to do that through the academia, and it was very hard to get budgets for it, and it was very hard to lead anything because it's very kind of publication focused. Let's not save the world focus, but publication focus. Yeah, start and publish, move on, right? Which has its merit, because without it, we wouldn't have existed. But it's very hard to take it beyond that. And so we started with AstroTeq. Back in the day, it was called AstroTectonic. And for me, it was always about changing people's lives. If we can forecast days like earthquakes, days in advance, we can save people's lives. That was the bottom line, right? And then while we were working on that, there was the massive earthquake in Turkey, 7.8, 3 years ago. 58,000 people died there, if I'm not mistaken. And we were trying to fundraise, and seismologists are blocking us everywhere. Like, investors are excited, they're going to seismologists telling them it's impossible to forecast earthquakes. So, anyways, long story short, I found it very interesting. I thought that the impact would be huge, and I decided to, with Noemi, to set up that company and see what happens next.
It's funny, Itamar, because my father, who's passed away, but he was a doctorate in geology, and he ended up running a gold mining company. And I talked to him about earthquake. He goes, there's no way to forecast them. I wish he was alive so I could go, actually, there really is a way to forecast them.
Exactly.
You mentioned your wife, Naomi, that she's an astrophysicist. And you said, can you just delve a little bit more into kind of her research and what was the discovery? And, you kind of mentioned you tried in academia, but at what point did you decide that this was a commercial solution?
So that research was actually born because of her professor. There is this Credo group, a group that specializes and focuses on cosmic radiation and possible use cases of them. And he was in Chile in 2010, just before the massive earthquake that took place there. They were doing cosmic radiation research, and they were collecting cosmic radiation data. The huge earthquake took place. They saw a huge anomaly before the earthquake, but they never gave it a second thought because they were looking at something completely different. 10 years later, they picked it up. They said, let's investigate this huge anomaly just before the earthquake. Can they be related? This is basically the trigger that led to that specific research. And that research was mainly kind of a statistical approach, but it was a very solid one. The results were solid. They were peer-reviewed. And so for me, it was, okay, so given it's true, the implications are huge. Like, for sure, governments would love to have something like that. For sure, the insurance and risk-focused industries would enjoy the value that this system can provide. For me, it was like a very, very clear understanding that governments, for sure, and insurance, it was double for sure, because they are suffering both from governments, because they're insuring governments, but also insuring heavy industries, infrastructure like oil, gas, etc. So whether they like it or not, they're exposed to it, even if they're putting, extra fees for it or whatever. At the end of the day, it made a lot of sense to me that we can drive huge value to them by helping them reduce the potential damages that they're going to pay for. And that means that both sides will be happy, both the client, because it suffers less damages, and the insurance company, because, well, they don't need to pay so much money, right? And the client is going to have less service interruption. And that's the sole purpose of that specific entity. They would like to continue to do business without suffering damages. So for me, it was obvious that we can get there, but the question was, can we give them the three most important points? Can we tell them that a major earthquake is coming? Can we give them a specific time frame of when it's going to arrive? And can we localize it? Right. So, and the answers to all the threes are yes, yes, and yes.
So just to set the stage for our listeners, can you kind of contrast that with the current warning system, sort of on a time basis and on a accuracy basis and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. So there are kind of earthquake forecasting systems that are experimental or in the academia. Most of them are not as accurate or statistically kind of probability and statistically focused. And they can tell you that, for example, there's a group in China that is called AETA. They can tell you that an earthquake will most likely take place in the next week. in a very specific area. But in order to give you that coverage, they need to install 3 very expensive detectors underground. So for every 100 square kilometers, you need to spend around 100,000 euros, give or take. So if you want to really distribute it, you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in order to cover seismic prone areas. So that's kind of out of the window. So, but potentially it is doable. The other systems that exist today are actually detection-based systems. They're not really forecasting, it's detection. It's usually based on seismographs. And the problem with that is that it's waiting for the earthquake to take place. And then it measures the waves that arrive, the first wave, and then depending on how far you are from the epicenter, how lucky you are, you might have, if you're in Japan, a minute or just a few seconds, depending really on. So of course it's amazing to have at least somewhat of a few seconds of warning, but the potential for damage reduction and then life saving is much, much lower if you just have a few seconds of notice time versus an hour or 2 or a few days. So that's what we have today. And just so you understand, it is so crucial for countries that they pay hundreds of millions of dollars for such systems. So a Shake Alert cost about $300 million, Shake Alert in California, $300 million all in all, if you combine all of the costs. And when it works, it provides you up to 12 seconds of notice time. Yeah, so Japan just paid across almost $1 billion to set up a new system underground on the shore to detect tsunamis coming. Yeah, like those kind of problems are, countries are actively seeking for new solutions in order to solve those problems.
So 12 seconds and you're at 14 days.
Actually, if you want to be, we can actually see it up to 25 days in advance.
So tell us sort of, in statistics, there's correlation and causation and all those good, necessary and sufficient and all that. Just give us a little insight into can you walk us through kind of the science? How does monitoring cosmic rays actually tell you that an earthquake is coming?
Okay, that's a tricky part. I need to be very careful of how to answer my answer because we just finished writing 100 patents that we're about to file, and I want to make sure I'm not tripping myself here. In a nutshell, there are publications that are already out there that shows that there are specific precursors in magnetic field or in the atmosphere prior to an earthquake. The question is, can you really understand from those precursors if an earthquake is really about to happen or not? And if so, where exactly, what's the magnitude, and what is the time frame for its arrival? That's the tricky part. Cosmic radiation can give us a lot of information, but that's just not enough. You need to have multiple data channels, kind of stacked different machine learning models dealing with different data sets. And then once you do your magic, which unfortunately I cannot really specify right now, you can basically combine it into, is there going to be an earthquake in a specific area? If so, where exactly in that area? And how certain is the system that it's going to happen? So for example, we've managed to bring it to a place where in Chile, we will only notify the authorities if they only care about 7 and above in magnitude. We will only notify them 0.5% of days a year. So that's about 5 days, give or take, 5-6 days per year. And when we will notify them, about 50% of the alarms that we will produce will be 5.5 to 6.5 in magnitude. And then another 30 to 35% will be 6.5 to 6.9 in magnitude. And then the remainder is 7 and above, because 7 and above, they're so rare that you have so many days of forecasts, right? And then suddenly earthquake that is 7 and above is happening, right? So it's almost like being able to predict where a lightning will strike in 3 days. Will it strike? If so, where and how powerful it will be? Almost. So it's definitely doable. We did it, right? It just takes a lot of data, a lot of work, and a lot of creativity to get there.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, I mean, just to spell it out for our folks who are are primarily involved in risk management and insurance, with these warning windows of 14 or 5 days and 1 day, what can governments and utilities and industries actually do to protect lives and assets, that they can't do with just sort of seconds of warning?
Yeah, so we actually moved away from 1 day, 5 days, 14 days. We have much more pinpointed forecasts today. So we'll be able to tell you in the next 48 hours it will happen, or in 3 to 5 days, or in 6 to 8 days. So it actually gives you proper time to prepare yourself for it. And you can do so many things. Just a day before, you can shut down your factory, right? If your factory is working while a massive earthquake is taking place, assuming that your factory stays without crumbling, then you have machinery that is operating, it's moving, right? So if a machinery is moving while a massive earthquake takes place, it will for sure be much more damaged than if it's um, just shut down and secured. And then, of course, you have people that are there that will get hurt. And so, very, very simple steps: shut down pipes, evacuate people, leave skeleton crew, and then just those things can reduce your damages by a factor of 1 to 7, up to 1 to 160, depending on the industry itself. So if you have nuclear power plant and you know that an earthquake is going to happen in 3 to 5 days, you will move the power plant to safe mode or even shut it down just to make sure, because if it's like 7 and above, you might prefer to shut it down. And then you can avoid what happened in Tohoku in 2011, where they had only 60 seconds before the earthquake hit and they didn't manage to do much with it. And total costs amounted to about $500 million if you normalize it to today's valuation. Almost $500 billion from one earthquake, not to mention the nuclear leak, right? The radiation leak that spread around the world in the oceans and harmed fishery and animals, etc. So you can do so many things just by having 1 day, 3 days, I don't know, depending on the type of earthquake.
So let's extend that a little then from an insurance and risk management perspective. For insurers, how does this kind of predictive capability change the equations? Like, what kind of conversations are you having with insurers about loss prevention?
I think that when we started to talk to the insurance market, they were like, forget about it. Earthquakes cannot be forecasted. But as technology matured, machine learning, AI, predictive technologies, they started to think in preventive ways, right? So, for example, Tokyo Marine is very, very focused on preventive. They have essentially moved from compensation to prevention as much as possible. And so once the insurance entity has made the transition from reactive to proactive, then the conversation becomes much, much easier. And so assuming they've done that, you can integrate it into your policies, right? So if you're insuring your employees or your factory, whatever that may be, then in the part of the insurance policy, it would be you have to use AstroTeq AI's forecasting system, just like you have to have sprinkler systems or anti-theft, technology in your car or whatever that may be. It's already, we're not inventing anything. The insurance market is utilizing existing technologies in order to reduce its risk. And so this is kind of how we're looking at things. If you properly embed it into your product, you can dramatically reduce the damages that you pay, and you give your client a better service because your client is suffering less damages. And so it's a win-win situation. They're happy. You as an insurer are happy because your net profit is higher, right? And this is kind of where we're looking to work. We would like to create a win-win situation for everyone. And then beyond that, of course, you have the claims departments where they need to prepare for the disaster. So they're doing it today very nicely when it comes to different types of disaster. You can actually forecast. Same thing. Do it with earthquakes. Prepare your loss adjusters, right? So you know that's going to happen in a specific area. Reserve them. You have very few loss adjusters in the world, and you don't have many of them. Reserve capacity for satellites. Take images before the earthquake takes place. Take images after, and then quickly assess the damages. And then because you know how to assess the damages faster, or you can do that, then you can close the cycle of compensation much sooner. One of the more interesting points were that when I was in Lloyd's lab, I was sitting with a couple of people from the industry, from the insurance industry, and they were like, there were a couple of times where earthquakes caused us to lose reputation in such a strong way that we had to pay tens of millions and years to recover our reputation after a massive earthquake took place. We were just not prepared for it. It took us so long to bring in the people, to assess the damages, to understand really what's going on there. And this is exactly where we're coming into the picture. If they know that something is about to happen, they can be better prepared for it.
So you mentioned from reactive to proactive, which I think is, I know Tokyo Marine and some others are really into that. So as you scale globally, so what does that transformation look like? And when you think about regions of the world, which regions, in your mind, need this most urgently?
Places like Mexico, Chile, definitely needed more. Indonesia, all of the places really, really suffer, but Morocco, essentially Turkey, the problem is that either the quality of construction is not good enough, just the standards are not high. And so, for example, Chile just recently moved from standards such as California into Japanese standards. They have many more earthquakes. They are much stronger than California. It just didn't make sense that they have standards of California. They should have better standards, right? And so areas that the quality of construction is not high, those are the areas that are the most vulnerable and definitely the ones that need us the most. But at the same time, very well developed countries as Japan, the more developed the country is, the more painful the destruction is, right? From economic point of view. So even if you don't lose so many people, which is great because you're well prepared, each and every damage that you suffer is more expensive than if the country would have been poor, because your technology is more expensive. So if we look at Taiwan, for example, they have one of the most advanced chip manufacturing in the world, and it's also a seismic area. So if they have a seismic event that hurts their technology, the whole world is being brought to a halt almost. There are no chips. So this is the more advanced and developed your country is, the more technology focused it is, the more painful the hit is. And this is kind of where we come in to try and help them reduce the risk and build resilience.
I was in an earthquake in Taiwan several years ago, so I can attest to that. What markets are you operating in now, and where would you like to expand?
So right now we're working towards Turkey. So we have a local partner that we are now working in order we're finishing the technical due diligence, hopefully in the next 2 weeks to a month, depending on what else they need to see. And we're working with Tokyo Marine in Japan. Right now, the focus is to kick off a POC or a pilot, depending on what exactly they would like to achieve there. I just 2 days ago came back from Chile. I sat with the National Emergency Office there. Where do I want to go? I want to go to Mexico, Italy, California, everywhere that there is seismic activity, and I know that there is the will to implement such technologies.
Let me talk to you a little bit about your solution combines hardware and software, consistent with not giving away too much information. But can you give us a high-level description of all that's required to deploy in an area for effective coverage?
So it really depends on the level of accuracy that our clients would like to receive. The more accuracy, the more stations we need. But in a nutshell, our infrastructure I'll probably need between 8 to 10 stations to cover Japan, something like that. A bit more for California, like about 14 stations. And beyond the stations, we are using, like you said initially, it's a multi-channel, multi-messenger approach. So we're using additional data channels, which are satellite focused from SAR imagery, thermal imaging, and then additional channels. Our approach in general is to have the most easiest to deploy infrastructure. So it's very easy for us to deploy stations and to use as many global data sets as we can put our hands on, because it's simply global and it's just easier to integrate those data channels. This way, it allows us to scale quite quickly. So if a client, for example, needs us in a specific area, within 6 months from the moment that we said yes and signed something to the moment we can actually forecast earthquakes there. So time frame is very, very short. And as we're moving forward, it will become shorter and shorter.
For millennia, earthquakes seem to be random events. So tell us why you think it's different now and that really it is possible to forecast earthquakes.
Earthquakes can be forecasted. I completely understand seismologists. I really do. They've been working in a specific field for many, many years. They've been using specific sets of tools for many, many years. And through those tools and that specific kind of angle, you cannot really forecast earthquakes. But we're not doing that. We went in a completely different direction. We have multiple data channels that combined allows us to very, very accurately forecast earthquakes with very, very low burden of alarm. Like alarm rate is very, very low. And so just to keep an open mind, this is possible. We've done that, and we'll be happy to speak with the people who are interested in embedding our system and its capabilities into their services. The Earth does tell us that earthquake is about to happen. It's just whispering. It's not it's not shouting it. It's whispering, and it's whispering it in through different data channels. And so you really need to listen to the whispers and connect them in order to create a coherent picture and understand something big is coming. But it's definitely doable.
This is so fascinating to me, I have to tell you. That's an amazing thing. And what a great thing. You can save people's lives and we're all about predict and prevent. So this is kind of right up on that and at scale and very impactful. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Pete. Much appreciated.
Predict and Prevent is a podcast brought to you by the Institutes. Subscribe on your preferred listening platform and join us for future episodes, where we continue to dig into this approach and the opportunities it's creating for risk management and insurance.